All right. Everyone feeling good? No? Yes? All right, let's get a little woo. All right, here we go. Hi, good evening to everyone here at camp and those watching online. I'm Jason Nam, the founder of Design Disco, and we welcome you to this talk, which is part of Design Disco's Summer Studio Workshop. We're a nonprofit organization with the mission to change the way design is taught and teach the way design is changed. And as part of the Summer Studio Workshop, we are delighted to have Philipp Sack from the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation with us this evening. Philipp is a research associate at the Academy Department of the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation. He manages the Bauhaus Lab program in the Global Modernism Studies and is the co-lead of the multi-year research project Schools of Departure, an online atlas mapping the globally entangled histories of design and art, education beyond the Bauhaus. He's particularly interested in implementing and studying educational formats, emerging in the interplay between cultural and educational institutions, as well as the history and theory of visual cultures. So please welcome me in welcoming Philipp Sack. It's all yours.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation, Jason. Thanks for the tech support and like the overall hospitality of camp so far. That was really extraordinary. And thanks to you all for showing up on what is a lovely summer night outside. I don't know if you have noticed, but I will chalk this up as another victory of the Bauhaus over the sun, I guess. And I do enjoy that, and I do hope that in what I am going to present, I will make it clear why I find that enjoyable, but also a bit problematic. But I'm still glad you came, though. So, yeah, I think you're all found like the paper sheets lying on your seats. This will actually come into play later, so you can just like ignore them, but maybe like keep them close by. And for everyone sitting on the stairs, there's like a stack of papers here that you can also draw from. And for everyone following online, there will be a way for them all to participate like digitally in what we'll do later. Okay. Yeah, also maybe just as a warning, this talk is going to consist of like 2 main chapters, and we will then have the possibility to go like into a Q&A of sorts, and maybe also follow up on some of the things that we won't be able to address sort of in the heat of the moment when we do the thing with the paper. So just so you know. Yeah, I don't know if Camp advertised the talk with a different title. If so, I'm really sorry. It is still basically the same talk, but with like one kind of lingo replacing another. So now I kind of settled for making and breaking the mold, actualizing Bauhaus pedagogies. Some of the alternative titles that I considered were the implicit epistemology embedded in Bauhaus pedagogy, but then I figured, no, that's not. Also, it would have taken up the entire slide. Confessions of a Bauhaus bureaucrat was another. And I forgot like the third one. Anyways, let's jump right in. So yeah, as I mentioned, talk is going to consist of 2 parts. One where I try and like walk you through my subjective take on the history of the Bauhaus and how that kind of feeds into what the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation does today. And I hope to exemplify this like by talking about one project. The second part then will be the interactive one and an elaboration on that later, and I will not explain the titles yet. So obviously the Bauhaus is still a huge draw, because otherwise I suppose you wouldn't be here. And I'm so old, I don't have like social media, so I always have to rely like on a Google image search in order to like, you know, vibe out what's hot. And this happened like 2 days ago when I typed in Bauhaus. So you do obviously find the notorious shots of the building with the iconic facade and the letters and, you know, all that. There's even, I just noticed like maybe a version of the photo that was up here earlier. But so scrolling along like all these search results, I did come across some that I especially liked because they kind of inform us about like the status of the Bauhaus in the cultural landscape of Germany for sure, but also sort of in the Euro transatlantic kind of realm, I suppose. So the first one is this. This is like a folding meter that you can get like at any hardware store, obviously, and it always warms my heart to know that there is a hardware store called Bauhaus, and I think like there are even stores in the Czech Republic, if I'm not mistaken. So in each of these stores, you get like a folding meter with sort of the place printed on one of the side. So that would have made for amazing unofficial merch. Unfortunately, though, the Dessau store closed just a couple months ago. So now there's only one Bauhaus left in Dessau. But like the history of why that place is called Bauhaus is a bit murky, and it's no like direct take on the historical school, but there has been sort of debate on who can lay claims to the brand. And this kind of already segues into like what I find interesting and what continues to fascinate me as someone who works at the place is that it is just like this amazing exercise in branding. Successful to a degree that, you'll find like replicas of the Bauhaus building basically all across the internet. This one actually only visible upon like second glance is made in Minecraft. And it's only the clouds that really give it away, because the rest, it does look like a proper rendering. So the building does lend itself to like teaching students how to, you know, do a proper 3D model with proper right angles. So that also like the SketchUp warehouse is filled with models of the place that are like geolocalized, and where some probably first-year architecture students go to the ordeal of like mapping the building over and over and over and over again. So in a nutshell, it is this fixture in architectural history, and it's, I suppose, for this reason that you are here. So what I'm trying to do today is to narrate one of the, say, lineages that led to the Bauhaus being where it is, and what that, and how that informs the way that we are now preserving whatever heritage there is. the Bauhaus is such a successful example of like spot-on branding. Well, first because the name is kind of catchy, obviously, but also because Walter Gropius, the founding director, very consciously employed the iconicity of the building and means for pictures of the building to proliferate for his own purposes, obviously. So what I'm showing you here is a 1926 postcard of the Bauhaus building, shot in winter, so probably shortly after that building was inaugurated in December 1926. The photographer is not named, but for Prague residents or like longer-term visitors, I hear that there's a lovely exhibition at the Kunsthalle Praha currently on Lucia Moholi, who kind of got ripped off by Gropius for most of the photos that she took of the building. So it might be, but yeah, we like at least our collection database doesn't say anything about it. That's a significantly less lovely shot of the building. What it says in cursive is that this is the Nazi Party state administrator school of the Magdeburg-Anhalt Gau, so which is like one of the sort of regional entities that they had. The school closed shop in 1933 for good. It already had to abandon the Dessau building a couple months earlier in 1932 upon pressure basically from the Nazis coming into power and just pushing the school out. Initial plans that they had to just demolish the building haven't been followed through because obviously there is a practical use to a place that like shields you from the rain, and so they just use it as a different kind of school. Actually, this now initiates sort of a wide variety of uses that the building was subject to in the decades, basically, that followed its closure. So I think not in parallel, but shortly one after the other, there was a women's school for home economics, also like in the during the Nazi era. Then part of the research facility of the Junkers aircraft manufacturer also set up shop there, which led to the building becoming a strategical target and thus heavily damaged during an air raid of the British Air Force in March 1945. And unfortunately, now the next picture that I'm going to show you kind of glosses over what happened to the building between the end of the Second World War and 1976, which is when that picture was taken with the remarkable choice of the fuzzy foreground. Because it was only in 1976 that the building was for the first time restored to its historic state, at least, say, in an approximative kind of way. In the meantime, the building had been in constant use, mostly used like as a vocational training facility, so people learned how to become a cook, a nurse, all kinds of professions there. And some of the most striking architectural features of the building had been adopted so as to manage the post-war scarcity. So meaning that the glass curtain facade that you see here in all its aluminum glory had been bricked up and had given way to just like window hatches, basically, because the building, as you can imagine, is also not very energy efficient. So it does. It made sense economically at the time to proceed like this. However, in the 70s, the GDR government wanted to, let's say, accompany a large-scale housing policy by a reassessment, re-evaluation of like modernist architecture. So up until that point, the Bauhaus did have a hard time in GDR historiography, mostly being reproached of being like this, petit bourgeois kind of hotbed with no social consciousness and or responsibilities whatsoever. So it was only in the following 30 years that this kind of reassessment took place. And obviously, if you want to sell like prefab architecture to a population, it does make sense to kind of draw on a modernist heritage, because formally there's like an easy way sort of to connect these two. The 1976 refurbishment of the building also was kind of the nucleus for the institution that I'm now being employed by, the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation. At the time, actually not yet using the logo. This was done only like in the, as you can tell, late 80s, early 90s. But yeah, there was this wish not only to assess the Bauhaus heritage on a formal level with regards to sort of the built environment and the works of art and the design objects that have been created at the school, but also to take into consideration the wider cultural implications that the school had and continues to have in some way or another. Second major renovation then went on in 2006, and now we're actually in the lead up to yet another major refurbishment of the place, because in '76, when the facade had been restored, they didn't use steel frames, but aluminum ones that react just differently or less flexibly to the challenge posed by the climate crisis. And so the entire glass curtain facade needs to be like done over in the years to come. So if you, this is just like a sort of an ad block. If you do want to visit the building without scaffolding, now is the time to go. The Bauhaus Dessau Foundation, after the German reunification, was established with a clear mission. However, that mission also had been like subject to much change and debates, such as similar to the logos of the place, because like the one that is barely visible here on the photograph is sort of the logo that replaced the one that I've shown you before, which is, as you can see, much closer to the lettering on the facade, and actually also employed like this verticality as one of its defining features. And that one is what we're working with currently. So I do kind of like to show these, because not only is there no like one fixed narrative of the Bauhaus as a historical school, but there's not even like a fixed narrative of the institution now in charge of preserving its legacy. So one of the defining features of the mission of the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation, that is really like a thread, like going all the way back to 1994 when it was first established, is a concern for the Bauhaus as a school. In 1976, when they did the first refurbishment of the building, they also initiated a collection, meaning that they like bankrolled a couple of acquisitions on the socialist art market, and that was sort of the nucleus for what is now I think the second largest collection of like Bauhaus related items in the world, with the largest being the Bauhaus archive in Berlin by several orders of magnitude, actually. So it's, but anyways, we do have a significant chunk of that collection specifically dedicated to student work. So we kind of have documents on how the place used to be, or used to function as a site of knowledge production. And these can be, like some of the drawings or the photo documentations of objects created by students. But there can also be like very mundane stuff, such as the artist materials and pencils that we think students might have employed because they were given to the collection like by former Bauhauslers. So we are kind of in the process of always trying to reverse engineer the actual Bauhaus pedagogy as it presented itself like in a specific moment in time from the student works, because we only have the works. We don't necessarily have the brief that went with it. And so we can only speculate sometimes sort of what the problem was that we are now just having like the solution for, basically, which is a beautiful thing to do, but also, speculative in nature. The photograph that I'm showing is probably one that you have encountered many times when being confronted with Bauhaus pedagogy. Josef Albers, the one with the, the nice suit, in the midst of his students assessing student works, like objects created by just folding cardboard or paper. They did this in a specific kind of place at the building, and what we see here in a different shot, basically of the same situation, because if we go back, you can see that in the background there's like the closet visible that now here the student works are attached to, and also like Albus is wearing the same suit. So we know it must have been sort of the same session, and the idea really is to assess student work as free as possible from prior conception, taxonomies, hierarchies, aesthetic, prejudice, whatever, meaning that this sort of blank slate character of works appearing just next to each other and basically making sense just by this juxtaposition is something that I personally find somewhat interesting, but that is also not representative, say, for Bauhaus pedagogy as a whole, because the main difficulty that we have is knowing like what phase of the Bauhaus, what director, what like leader of the preliminary course do we actually mean when we talk about the school. So this is just sort of the a screenshot of the law that I owe my job to, because it creates like the department that I'm working in under in paragraph 2, section 4, the academy. So there are like a couple of departments established by that law from the 9th February 1994, most of which are concerned with preserving the physical integrity of the material, legacy of the Bauhaus. Just making sure that the buildings are okay, stuff like that. The academy is a little more fuzzy, but we mostly make it our mission to concentrate on the less material aspects of the Bauhaus legacy. And how this presents itself today is something that I'm trying to show by just like scrolling through our current website. So the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation is not a school, but it's also not a museum. And it's actually both at the same time. So we're this beautiful institutional bastard that can basically operate in niches that are inaccessible to full-on art schools or full-on museums in a way. So there is still a master's course being taught at the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation, and Jason is actually a survivor of that course. But we're not the ones handing out the degrees, because it's like done in collaboration with the Anhalt University of Applied Sciences and the Humboldt University in Berlin. So there is, like in a more narrow sense, teaching going on. It's like a master's course, 1 year, Master of Science in Design Research. But there are also like a whole bunch of other research and education programs that we're running that, try to work in the interstices between these different institutional entities. So feel free to check out our website. I'll just go on to a project that I have been dedicating most of my time to currently. The Bauhaus calls and you all show up, which is kind of a testament to the incredibly privileged position that I am speaking from, just as a representative of this foundation. And that privilege comes with a lot of perks, but also with a lot of responsibility. And in order to better address the responsibilities that arise from this, we have been working on a project that tries to map experiments in pedagogy in the fields of design and art and position the Bauhaus within that network of schools and collectives. So we kind of wanted to complicate the narrative of the school being this beacon or this super successful German cultural export, and rather provide context, basically. So in our collection, we did find a couple of documents that we found inspiring for such an endeavor of situating the school. So this one is a series of photographs showing the school under construction, but as you can tell, like from a couple of different angles, which is actually the only way that you can do justice to the building or like intellectually grasp it, because there's no like main axis that you can tell what the building actually consists of. We do have a couple of drawings done by former Bauhauslers that are cartographic in nature in probably a narrower sense, such as this one of the Crimea Peninsula. I think it's by Siegfried Egebeling. But we do also have documents such as these, which is basically just a typography exercise, but one where the places chosen to exemplify the typographic qualities of that font do locate the school in this worldly continuum. So Tashkent, Moscow, Dessau, it's like Paris, London, New York. This is basically, a way of again, situating the school that is not cartographic. Obviously, there are like beautiful examples of Bauhäuslers working in like a cartographic vein, such as the World Atlas by Herbert Bayer. It's actually super rare, and if you get your hands on one, hit that buy button. It's a beautiful work that had only like a very small print run because it was produced for the Container Corporation of America, basically, just as a gift to their larger clients. But when it came to drawing on methods of mapping, this was not the approach that was really interesting to us, because if we, as the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation, just like started, putting digital flag poles in the ground, claiming some school for the Bauhaus history in all its glory, that would not sort of feel okay. And so an atlas that we drew inspiration from is actually this one. Abi Warburg's picture atlas, Mnemosyne. So this is a work by a German Jewish art historian who in the late 20s used photography in order to juxtapose images that are like separated by both spatial and temporal distance, in order to, just from juxtaposing them, be able to explore like other art historical narratives about like how certain gestures maybe traveled through time and space. And without ever breaking that down into a linear narrative, but just like leaving it open. He like constantly rearranged these and had like then these arrangements photographed again. So it's a sort of never finished attempt at, again, visually, or making an argument visually, I would say, about place and time. And this is something that we then tried to do with the Atlas. One of the main inspirations was the Bauhaus Imaginista project, which on the occasion of the Bauhaus Centenary in 2019 also endeavored to like situate the school in a global network of radical pedagogies. And one of the most charming examples of such an attempt of like turning cartography on its head is this somewhat famous drawing by the Escuela del Sur, a Uruguayan-based art school that focused on Latin American identity, but by declaring the European North or the European South their North, basically. So by just like flipping the map on its head and have the equator as this kind of baseline. So this basically led us then to coming up with this website. I'm going to share a QR code later so that you can like check the mobile version, which is much less flashy. But the idea was really to have this ever-growing and always messy archive of pedagogical experiments that developed in parallel to the Bauhaus, that positioned themselves in a direct tradition to the Bauhaus, or most interestingly for us, that are in open opposition to the Bauhaus model in some way or another. And we are now like constantly inviting collaborators to just like add schools, pitches, subjects. It's something that we, it doesn't have like a clear methodology, but we have come up with calling it serendipity-led. And so if any one of you feels inspired to pitch something, feel free. Okay, second part. I've gone on for a long time, so I'll try to keep it brief. Let's cancel circles. The notorious diagram that probably you have been exposed to at some part of your training has come to represent Bauhaus pedagogy, like in and for itself. It has only been available in German, and I think this is a version that we stole from the Getty Institute, just to make it clearer, sort of, in terms of the different segments of this diagram. This was a visualization proposed by Walter Gropius in 1922 in order to, sort of advertise the school. Bauhaus pedagogy itself never looked like this in any point of the existence of the school. This was kind of a projection, and one that was incomplete to begin with. It is fairly circular and does imply this progression from the outside to the center, toward the center of this shape. So students would first enter the school by passing the preliminary course, which was actually on a sort of pass-fail basis. You see that the duration of that course is here marked with half a year. It was later even extended to a full year. So this was really supposed to be the foundation class for Bauhaus, where they would not only acquire like the skills and knowledge necessary to then kind of navigate their way through the rest of their curriculum, but more importantly even, where they were supposed to unlearn whatever baggage they brought from like a prior education that they had. So it was really this rite of initiation, this attempt at like resetting, re-mindsetting the students in order for them to become proper modern practitioners. So they then would go on to work in one of the workshops. This would actually have taken place like in the workshop wing with the Bauhaus lettering on the side that I've shown you, to finally have all their knowledge culminate in the practice of architecture. You can easily tell that Gropius himself was an architect when he devised this scheme and like kind of placed his own profession right at the peak. The historical Bauhaus never had an architecture department as long as Gropius was there. It was only after Gropius left his directorship for Hannes Meyer to take over that the school got an architecture department to properly speak of. Before that, Gropius ran his own architecture practice out from the school. But meaning like during his entire tenure, this thing basically has been unfinished. Maybe you recognize the space that I'm overlaying here, and maybe it dawns on you what I have in mind with these paper sheets that we distributed. So this thing is more than 100 years old, so I guess it needs some updating. And what I would invite you to do in the next couple minutes, say 3, is to find the piece of paper that was laying on or near your seat. Try to sort of locate yourself on the diagram. And then ask yourself, are you okay with whatever segment of the curriculum is mentioned on there? is this still a core skill for modern designers and architects to acquire, or would you rather have it say something else? If that's the case, then you can use one of the like markers that are flying around in order to note that down. Don't be thrifty. You can like do huge lettering, and the idea is to have like a group shot of an updated Bauhaus curriculum as the basis for the Q&A afterwards. You all okay? 2 more minutes. Go. Okay, so I've just shown you like the architectural properties of this space don't lend itself easily to mapping onto like a full circle. It's only going to be a half circle. So now let's complete the circle by everyone just holding up whatever they have been able to come up with, and we'll like do this group thing where you can all see the results of this collective endeavor, and I'll try to just like film. I'm really bad at this. Okay. Is this legible? No, right? On the, yeah? Okay. There you go. Thank you. I was so looking forward to this. Okay. I'll try to. Haha. Okay, lighting. Okay, can everyone read this okay? Like, it's really just to get like an idea. I'm actually so involved in the shooting that I don't even pay attention to what you've written so far, but okay. Thank you. We'll get back to this later. I don't know if it's of any consolation for you to know that you're not the first ones that I subject to an experiment such as this. We have had students of art schools that we've been working with in the past couple of years revisit the curriculum and come up with their own individual takes and updates and critiques and takedowns of that thing. So I'm just, without going into detail, showing you like a couple of these. We did kind of like lead them to stick to the circular shape, but obviously there were some renouncing the shape in favor of something else. And some even like going wild and building models, and the curriculum is actually a video of the model spinning. I have no more knowledge about that. But they're in good company, actually, because the way that knowledge should be produced at the historical Bauhaus has always been heavily contested. And what I'm showing you here is one attempt at, again, visualizing a different take on learning at the school. This is one by Hannes Meyer, the successor of Walter Gropius at the helm of the Bauhaus, who only like had a 2-year tenure before he got sacked because he was much too left-leaning for the tastes of the local government. And you can see here the difference to the circular shape is striking, right? The Gropius one kind of, let's see if I can go back to here. You see it's all like culminating in the center. It's kind of directing students to go inwards to then become like, or to have a proper profession, namely that of an architect. Whereas this is a more or less straight line that is sort of interconnected. There's like the spectrum between Kunst and Wissenschaft, so art and science, where sort of most of these subjects are sort of located. There's the spectrum, and then there's this axis that goes from left to right and culminates not in the profession of the architect, like as a, again, fulfilled modernist being, but in a Werk, in just some work happening in the real world. And actually here, whereas the circle in its shape kind of conveys this notion of stability and timelessness, here you can see it's like a pretty messy interconnection of different elements that, has a degree of flexibility to it, let's say. Also, maybe as a side note, never actually implemented, because Hannes Meyer ideally would have wanted to depart from this student-master kind of relationship that was so dear to the Bauhaus founders. But obviously all the masters kind of weren't convinced, and so he never actually got to go through with this. So now I'm already kind of on the last leg of this talk, just to reassure you. We are kind of going to geek out a bit about like different diagrams that have been created by schools that locate themselves explicitly sort of in the Bauhaus tradition. So what you have here is like this scheme by Tibor Weiner, who was a student under Hannes Meyer, went to the USSR and later, after the Second World War, to Chile, where in Santiago he basically did like this whole institutional reset of the architecture department. So this was all about triangles. This one maybe you've come across also. It's an early draft of the curriculum of the Ulm School of Design, supposed to be a more or less direct post-war denazified successor of the Bauhaus. Again, big on circles, but kind of introducing something new with this Venn diagram kind of intersections. And then, I think this is the last slide I'm going to show you, I'm not sure. A school that, like at lunch, I already mentioned briefly, that also positioned itself in the Bauhaus tradition and was like a direct successor of the Ulm school, but only existed like for 2 years in Paris. Having like this grid-like approach. And I am, without going like into detail, this is something that I would love to dig deeper into, to find out more about the epistemologies embedded in like any way of graphic representation. I mean, here basically this is late 60s, so we're like 2 years away from, I don't know if you're familiar with the logo of Deutsche Bank. It's basically the same shape but with the thing going up. So there is like this rich visual history of art and design teaching that I think we could kind of reevaluate in order to draw lessons for today. And in order to do that, we could maybe discuss what you've written down on your sheets. That was my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. I have so many questions.
Like, why?
What's going on? I mean, thank you so much. I think it's really interesting to hear about the history of Bauhaus. And I don't know, how many of you, I mean, I'm guessing all of you have heard of Bauhaus, that's why you're here. But how many of you know are associating Bauhaus more with the design and the furniture that was produced versus the school and the education? Just a quick curiosity, who here is more familiar or more knowledgeable of Bauhaus as a school, as an education space? And then the rest of you, did you think that you were coming to a talk that talks about the Wasili chair? No? Okay. But it's really interesting, and I have so many questions. But before I start asking questions and we open up the floor to you, I want to point to the lovely QR code over there, and those who are watching online, you are, of course, more than welcome to ask questions right away. But if you're an introvert, we totally love you and support you. You can scan that QR code and secretly type your question anonymously, and I will read some out. But how should we do this? Do we want to actually discuss a little bit of what we saw?
Yeah, I mean, you've put so much work into those reconceptualizations of the Bauhaus curriculum, so I figured we might use this as a jump-off point.
Yeah.
So is there anyone who really urgently needs to share their take?
If you're too shy, you can always scan the QR code. I'm wondering, maybe we can start asking directly to the summer studio participants. Yes. What are your thoughts? Like, we took a look at the existing, the Bauhaus pedagogy. So, like, there are certainly things that I look at, like clay, stone, wood. I don't know if it's so relevant today. I'm also wondering what it was trying to achieve. You did mention that, like, the pinnacle goal was to, like, produce an architect. But how would you say, like, what is your critique on this? I'm curious.
I would be too, so I'll try to come up with something while I speak. I think I wouldn't say that I have a critique necessarily about this, because this is a curriculum that obviously is very much of its time and has worked. Maybe not forming like fully reformed modern subjects, but has worked insofar as we're now sitting here discussing about it. It's a proposition about learning that is still kind of resonant, and one of the reasons for this is the inherent qualities, and another reason is because some of the stuff might strike us as somewhat problematic in some way. And
Yeah, I wonder if Bauhaus was to open today, in today's context, with all the technology, TikTok, social media, all the terrible things, what would this look like? I'm very curious. But again, if anyone has a question, like, I'm gonna keep talking unless you guys raise your hand. So, yeah, I was just wondering, as we're learning about the Bauhaus School, it's pretty remarkable that the Bauhaus School has had such an impact in the world, because it's almost like, if we talk about the design industry, it's almost impossible to not mention the Bauhaus. But what do you think it was about the school that made it so influential? Was it just kind of the timing? Was it good marketing? Maybe there was an amazing school better than the Bauhaus, but they just never advertised themselves? Or do you think there's something special, secret formula to this school?
Yeah, I think the school was kind of the serendipitous result of multiple factors converging. One of them being Gropius as just like a branding genius, obviously, but then also the openness and will to embrace the school and its experimental character, specifically like in the Dessau phase, by just local funding bodies, really. So Dessau was basically when the school needed to close shop in Weimar because of the political heat that they were exposed to. Gropius had several mayors pitch to him where the school should go. And Dessau just like made him the sweetest deal. So they bankrolled the building, they gave him a lot to build on, and had like this stable social democratic at the time majority in the municipal government. So it was, yeah, again, like an array of, or an alignment of several factors, I think, that brought the school into fruition.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to jump back to geometry and the nature of the circle, because one of the things I'm really interested in is that we're starting from the most general at the outside of the circle and gradually narrowing the focus, as opposed to beginning at the center and moving outwards into the world. And so I'm wondering about that, and I'm also wondering about our present-day association with between circles and cycles. And so the movement, instead of being either in or out, is around and maybe even helical. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on the philosophy behind a pedagogy that's expressed in circles, moving in one direction or another.
Yeah, oh, thank you. I can probably not like give a very well informed answer, but it definitely like provides lots of food for thought. So first, as you mentioned, with regards to sort of the implicit epistemology embedded in here, I think there's a secret third dimension to the diagram where the central point is also the highest. So it's like the hotel on Jestedt, kind of. And yeah, with regards to like circles and cycles and the temporalities at play in here, there's a rich visual tradition that predates this diagram by a couple centuries, basically, where you have papal rotas signifying like the immutability of the power of the Catholic Church, sort of in this temporal concept of time that is the circular concept of time, in a way. So it's something basically, yeah, or it draws on this. I don't know if consciously or not, but it's definitely there is an analogy, I would say, to be made. Because it's a representation of centralized power that is very easily made compatible to, yeah, like conservative projects in a way. So this is also a curriculum that you can sell to the most stubborn politician because they will get it in a way. Whereas the Maya one, less so, I would say. And yeah, in terms of now this renewed focus and concern of on like circular economies and cyclical movements in time and space, this is actually the new European Bauhaus project by the EU Commission, like in one yeah, I don't know, in one term, basically, in a nutshell. This is all like concerned about sustainability and practices. The kind of beauty that I find in, like, when I just look at the new European Bauhaus as this attempt also by a German EU Commission president of reclaiming that heritage, the beauty of the project is that for me, it's so bureaucratic. Like, the only artifacts that you have, other than the actual projects that are being implemented on sites, are like newsletters and lengthy PDFs that you download. And this actually, even though I doubt that it was intentional, could make way for this endeavor to actually be productive in a way, because it does not even attempt to set anything in stone, like here. But this is just me having an opinion. This is really not like. Okay.
Hello. Thanks for your talk again. And when I saw this chart and you mentioned it's like 100 years old or older, it still seems quite modern, and it imagines the designer as a very transdisciplinary person, a very capable person, and a person that does a lot of, comes up with his or her own concepts. But that actually is not necessarily the view of a designer in society today. So I was thinking maybe the biggest flaw is not in the circle itself, but in the communication to the outside world. I mean, the Bauhaus area was different because of the Nazi thing, but I mean, still, Ulm maybe was not successful because it was too much inside, discussing everything inside and not really getting these ideas out into the society or in the public. What's your opinion about that?
Yeah, there are elements of the curriculum that are, I would say, definitely well worth reconsidering. One, again, it's just like somewhat implicit, but you know, this focus on craft and the different like materials that you would work on resonates with contemporary discourses, again, like about new materialities and kind of the ecological challenges posed by late capitalism. So in that regard, for sure, also in the sense that the idea was before you had people attain like the ultimate stage of their Bauhaus training, you would actually obtain like a degree or a craft diploma, so to say. So the students of the Bauhaus more likely left the school with a crafts diploma than with a Bauhaus one, actually, because the Bauhaus one didn't get you a job. But if you were trained in wood or metal working, that for sure helped secure you like socially. So there was this awareness after also the catastrophe of the First World War, obviously, that you needed to provide students with a structure that allowed for some kind of social security, in a way. So there was like there was a responsibility that was really embraced, but that in communicating sort of the school maybe was an afterthought sometimes. But yeah. And yeah, Ulm is messier, obviously, like in a good way, I would say, but also not in a way that helps get your point across. And like what I showed you last, like the Institute of the Environment, that was like the short-lived Paris-based school that basically was founded out of the remnants of the Ulm school. It was called the Institute of the Environment, and they didn't even bother to define what they meant with the environment. This was the mission of the school, finding out what it was, which kind of is a tough sell, I guess. So, yeah.
Do you feel like it was kind of the reality of the society that made these schools following the Bauhaus kind of this, I mean, somewhat unsuccessful, and they were focusing perhaps too much on what type of students do we need to produce so that they can go into the workforce. Because I think the Bauhaus School, if we look into it, kind of didn't have that responsibility. It was almost like a radical rejection of the current state of Germany and Europe after the war. And they just, it almost seems like they had this pure intention to come together and like test out the human creativity to its limits, and they weren't really caring so much about what job am I gonna get. But then all these other schools, and even in today's education, maybe we're so focused on like, how do we find a job? How do we get that internship? How do we make money to pay the bills? Like, do you feel like that has some influence on it?
Well, I think that this is something that you could say about like certain aspects of the early period of the Bauhaus in Weimar, where it was more like rooted in an expressionist, artistic kind of tradition. The move to Dessau actually was accompanied by this major shift towards like embracing industry and mass production, and just seeking out means to collaborate and actually make themselves useful in whatever kind of politico-economical setting there was. This was markedly differently interpreted, say, between Walter Gropius and Hannes Meyer. Hannes Meyer was, or he like spoke of himself as a Marxist, and so he basically used the architecture department as a vertical brigade in order to collectively realize like planning and building projects, and did a couple of quite successful ones. So there is this concern of, yeah, again, like taking responsibility for society, but with a wide array of interpretations about what you mean when you say society.
Back to the hierarchical look, and this is all about building projects, and we use this word design. And what do we mean by it? Do we mean building design? Do we mean graphic design? Do we mean VR design? Do we mean Hollywood set design? There's all this stuff that's, well, SEO design. You know, there's all this stuff that's now considered design. And how do you deal with it? How do you model it? What's the paradigm? What's the way of looking at it? I don't think it's that, but you know, what do you think it is?
That's a great question.
I'm not sure if I have been able to intellectually grasp it, though. Could you maybe? I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah.
Which?
A better question. Okay, so we have this model. And I think the closest thing of the radical restructuring of it was the Škola del Sur. You know, what are there models proposed for the way we teach design now that look more like what we're doing?
So I understood the question because, as like, you know, design has clearly evolved since 1930s.
Shocker.
In a good way and maybe in some disturbing ways as well. But yeah, I think the question is really about how does this look like in today's updated terms of design, where we now have like the word design thrown literally everywhere. There's like service design, there's product design, there's, so yeah, anything design. How does this still apply to, can we apply this? I believe that's what was the question, right?
Okay, I hope that I can come up with something that is actually insightful, but I have a snarky reaction in a way to that. I think it would be really easy to like develop a course in curriculum design and basically, yeah, just like going full circle again, having just a community of learners basically always constantly renegotiating the terms of how and what and with whom and why and for whom they produce knowledge. But again, like who's going to bankroll this? And then another reaction that I have, but I don't know if this is actually to the point, is that it would be interesting to just like, you know, train some AI on a couple thousand of these diagrams, because there are like so many visual representations of like how knowledge production in the field of design should look like, and just have spit out like a couple of random ones and then do like a karaoke kind of thing.
Yeah, we'll have one more question.
I think one thing I'm really interested in your experience of, so it's not so much asking you a question about the Bauhaus, but more about your personal experience, is, you know, I feel like creative practices, architecture, design, art, reflect on their sort of cultural histories and their traditions, probably more than any other sector combined. And there are times when this reflection sometimes seems like a really rich, beneficial thing to do. But then I think about times, you know, in my experience of UK architecture schools, for example, where we are still very fixated on teaching architecture in this kind of social housing-led modernist framework, which obviously I think has a huge amount of value. But then you leave architecture school, you leave design education, and suddenly you're not in an economy that actually enables some of these traditions or values anymore. And you've spent 3 years learning about it, which I think is excellent and valuable. But then you come away without the ability to actually try and, I suppose to use your words, actualize it in the professional world of practice. So I suppose all of that to say, I'm curious about your experience of working for a foundation which is explicitly created for the purpose of trying to bring out the best of the past, of the history of this institution, but also understand how it applies to contemporary contexts. And I'm curious whether, you know, you ever get the feeling of like, oh, why don't we just like throw this damn circle out and just start again? Or whether you actually are very much in a space of feeling supported and like having this tradition enables you to be more ambitious or think of things in a way that you might not be able to if you're starting from a tabula rasa, blank canvas type thing.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really inspiring question. And also probably one to which I might be able to provide you with a definitive answer in like 10 years' time or so. But yeah, just like as a spontaneous reaction to that, I'm like a recovering art historian. I was like trained in a historical discipline. So my sort of initial impulse is always sort of to go poke past stuff and see what we can learn from it, rather than like start from this tabula rasa kind of thing. So I have no like kind of engineering mindset whatsoever, unfortunately. And yeah, I think in terms of the mission of my employer, that's maybe also the more sensible thing to adopt, because it means acknowledging that you won't be able to come up with anything better, so you can just see what you can learn from the successes and failures of the former school. Yeah, that was a very like, I don't know, PR officer kind of reply. I'm sorry.
All right. I believe we are running out of time. I guess the very last question is, can you give us a little sneak peek into what's next, like for the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation? Are you planning to reopen as a school, or what do you think is the future for Bauhaus and perhaps the academy?
So, yeah, as I mentioned, lots of scaffolding coming up in the nearer future. So we, like as the foundation in general, we will obviously be like foremostly concerned with preserving the heritage, but in the process also trying to reflect on it and learn stuff about anything from like historical materialities up to lessons to be drawn for stuff like circular economy. So this is I don't see that going away so far so quickly, and I do realize that like I'm at the place since 2018, and basically the years in the run-up to the centennial, we did this kind of self-exorcising where we just tried to get rid of the demons that haunted the Bauhaus, and like of all the, which I mean is empirically true, like all the bad stuff that the school was complicit in that still kind of continue to mess with contemporary design education. And we will never be done doing that. But I think what we now try to do is to make that productive in like more specific research and education projects.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I certainly hope we will see something like a new Bauhaus, not this like PDF, all this like bureaucratic new European Bauhaus that has nothing to do with the school. But I really hope we will see like a new form of radical school that will kind of shake things up in the education scene. Perhaps we will do it. Someone in this room will do it.
Yeah, I mean, a school is made out of people. So we would need everyone to just come to Dessau, claim the space, do something, be my guest. I hope this is not going onto the stream.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. We've run out of time, but to continue this conversation, know that Design Disco, we have meetups frequently in Prague and Berlin. So we'd love to connect. Give us a follow, get in touch with us, share your ideas, and let's change design and design change. So thank you once again to Philipp Sack. Thank you to Camp. One thing, if you could please leave your markers, do not take them home. We have to give them back to Camp, very strict instructions. And also, if I can ask the summer studio participants to stick around shortly, right after this, because we'll have some announcement. But thank you so much to all of you who came here, and thank you for those who watched online, and have a wonderful evening. Dobrou noc.
Thank you so much.
Feel free to scan this QR code. It's a surprise. Oh, it's gone.